I think a lot of us always wonder when, will we finally reap the benefits of what we sow, and when will we finally, get our desires that we so harshly expect. And I think that sometimes this very expectation is what takes us away, and also allowing everything to live in a world of thought alone. I think it's important to stop thinking and start being in a way. And that works in the same way as like stop trying to see life and instead try to be it. I feel like the presence that we give to our existence isn't necessarily about our thought, isn't necessarily about how much we can muster up and conjure up in our heads. It's about how much we can instantiate into the world, and that includes ourselves. We have a certain thought about ourselves, a certain perception of who we think we are. But I feel like we can't truly benefit from any perception of ourselves unless we instantiate it in the present. And I feel like if we don't do that consciously, if we don't take that conscious active participant role in instantiating good within ourselves and good within our expression, then all we're going to express is our most dominant thought, our most dominant and repetitive thoughts. And oftentimes, those are the thoughts that we don't want to be instantiated into the world. I feel like what we think of most typically, if we aren't intentional, or negative aspects, things that we want to run from, things that we don't want to think of. And I feel like the act of not thinking, like everyone knows when you try not to think of something, it makes it all the more harder to do. And I feel like it's important to sort of not necessarily hold on, but to let go of that. Realize that you aren't the thought and realize that you are the person reacting to it. And I know that's easier said than done, but I feel like if anything, it's the most important thing we can do for ourselves. To recognize that you aren't the thought is to also recognize the power of your thoughts. You know, if you can in some way instantiate or put some thought into your head and allow it to govern your whole entire life, then you could do the same for yourself positively. If we're going to allow thought to be used against us in a way of our own thought, our own consciousness, then why not instantiate something positive for ourselves? And starting to, I guess, be within the moment, you realize that, your thoughts aren't necessarily a governing principle, but they are a way at which we traverse the world. But I feel like if all we do is an analysis, or if all we do is analyze the world around us, then all we experience is that analysis. And I find that our thoughts are typically more representative of our insecurities, or I guess our negativity, when we don't have a not active control but active awareness of them. And I think awareness is truly all we have to give to ourselves in order to continue to move forward. I feel like it's not necessarily about going into this world and thinking through every single one of your actions, but being aware enough to recognize the implications of certain actions even before they come about. And I think that's what's important. Because I think in order to be something, in order to embody something, it's not necessarily about how you think about it, but how you react to it, how you move forward with it, and how you express it in a way that's not rehearsed. I feel like authenticity isn't necessarily about how much you think of yourself over and over again and recognize and get this solid idea of yourself to the point where you express it to the world in a certain way. I think it's more so like you understand that you aren't a thought thing. You understand that whatever this expression is you're trying to get at is more something that can be understood through the expression rather than than the thought. So if anything, being is really just moving forward where you are and watching the world unfold. Sort of watching with a positive outlook and keeping an optimistic point of view, because that's all that pretty much is. What we're aware of tends to come into our life and in ways we don't even know. And I think if we're aware of certain propensities of ours, if we're aware of certain negative aspects of ourselves that we want to run from, then it's only going to perpetuate that awareness. I think stop thinking and start being isn't necessarily saying rid yourself of thought and think that you shouldn't think at all. But to recognize that when you're trying to create something, you can't analyze it at the same time. I think we allow ourselves to live in so much connotation, especially while we're trying to change, that we constantly put ourselves and regress ourselves back into the point where we don't want to be. I think if we want anything new, then it's about doing new things for ourselves. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of, oh, I'm going to start painting. I'm going to pick up this hobby. I'm going to pick up this. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about, giving yourself enough love, affection, care, attention, discipline to change your perspective of yourself super intentionally. And I don't say super intentionally to enforce this idea that it has to be something very, filled with your effort. But I think that this is why things like meditation and things like that are important. Getting a grasp of yourself beyond your thoughts, beyond your application, beyond your utility in a way, and recognizing that your value is in your existence. And once we can sort of recognize that our value should not be derived by so much of these things outside of us, we realize that it's defined by what's inside. And if we can recognize that, then the only way we can truly appreciate that, the only way that we can truly, I guess, validate what that is by being present enough to do so. Your internal workings and your expression aren't necessarily something you think of. They're something you do. And it's in the same way of stop thinking, start doing, or stop trying, start doing. I think we lose a lot of our battles without even trying by thinking that they're battles. By thinking that, we have an opportunity to lose here when we don't. I think that anything we do is always going to be filled with us. Or at least should be filled with us to the point where we feel comfortable in doing it. Sometimes you have to put yourself in order to get yourself out of a lot of situations. I feel like sometimes we don't put ourselves into the lives we live to the point where they don't feel like we're living life. It feels like we're either watching someone's life or we're watching our life unfold or waiting for life to happen. But life is always happening. Life is where you are because life is what you are. And I think recognizing that is what allows it to be embodied in a way that is befitting. And I feel like if we can't do that for ourselves, if we can't learn to be ourselves, then there's no point in doing anything. I don't say that to say lead the world. Stay in the world, of course. But recognize that I think we sort of have our value messed up in regards to that. And I think that's why a lot of us are sort of losing ourselves along the way of trying to get our goals and aspirations because we think that this goal and aspiration is representative of who we are rather than what we want. I think we're associating ourselves too much with our desires to the point that we can no longer do actions void of them. And I was watching one of my old videos, I think it was yesterday, Expect Nothing, Gain Everything. Or I think that's what it was called. I think that was called. But it's essentially about doing things for what they do to you inside, not what they do for you outside. I feel like any type of expression, any type of creativity, any type of life that you live should not be lived in reference to how it makes someone else or something else react to you. Not to say that, you can't do things to get a certain reaction. Like I can't go out there, do this to make someone happy. Of course I can. But I have to recognize that certain expectations of that happiness and certain expectations of the world to react to you in a certain way takes away from your authenticity. Because it stops being about you doing it for you and you loving who you are and your expression and everything that surrounds you, and starts being for the love you have for other people's opinions, for other things' reactions to you. And this is not to say be negligent of the world we live in, be negligent of how society works and whatnot. But I recognize the most successful people in a way are the most authentic. Or at least creatively. I won't say that for like big business tycoons or whatever you want to call that. But I feel like when we view success as more of self, when we view success as becoming more of who we are, it makes all of life all the more beautiful. Because it stops being a journey about getting possessions of, how I worked my way up to getting this much money, how I worked my way up to doing this. Instead, it starts being how I found myself, how I recognize more of myself in what I'm doing, how I learned to love more of myself the more I learned about myself. And in that way, your life is going to be filled with that love and affection, that care. That money doesn't give you love, that whatever title doesn't give you love. It doesn't give you what you need in order to truly traverse this world. It doesn't give you the affirmation you need in order to feel like you're secure in terms of your person. It gives you affirmation and security relative to your possession. And I feel like if all we do is live in reference to that possession, then we're not really the subject our possession is. If we're the ones who give value to whatever it is we possess, then why should we make it more valuable than who we are? Why should we make it more valuable than the life we actually have been awarded? And that's why I feel like it's important to sort of stop this expectation aspect of it too. because we expect to get these certain possessions, we expect to get these certain reactions from the world, to the point where we stop doing things for the art of doing them. Stop doing things for the art of being within it and doing it because you like doing it, doing it because you like how it makes you feel. And I don't mean to talk about negative or immoral things. I do not. Of course, like acceptable things, things that are actually beneficial. When I say that, you need to do things that make you feel most like yourself, I don't mean things that could in any way harm others. When I talk about, focusing on your own expression and focusing on who you are rather than the reactions of others, I'm not talking about, acting in a way that can harm others either. I'm talking about acting in a way that's befitting of yourself. And when I say expression, I want people to recognize that expression is a very loose thing. It's a very fluid thing. I feel like you can express yourself in hundreds of ways, but your embodiment, who you actually are, is within that expression. And I think it's important to sort of get a better sense of that embodiment through allowing yourself to be expressed, through allowing yourself to be within the moment that you are in, and embrace the love of who you are. That doesn't mean that you won't see parts of yourself that seek out change. You won't see negative parts of yourself. Of course you'll see them. But I think in learning to love them, you learn to let them go. I think that constant, the test of ourselves, and in this feeling that we don't like this part of ourselves, is an act of inacceptance. It's an act of dissociation with itself and trying to compartmentalize something that we're treating as part of us. And I think if we truly want to let something go, we have to at first accept that we're holding on to it. Because if we don't do that, then we're constantly just going to be stuck in a battle of stagnation, in a battle with ourselves to try to let go of something that we aren't even recognizing we're holding on to. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge. And I think a lot of people don't acknowledge themselves. And that's why I think the being aspect comes in. Because we think all the time, we think how this relates to this. We think this is this. But how often do we take the time to actually just be in the skin that we're in? Be the person that we are. Be who we are. And I think a lot of people are also confused in that too. Because it's not even something I can fully define, like, oh, be who you are, but who am I? I think that whole idea is more easily expressed than it is thought. I think asking yourself, oh, who am I, is retreating back to this idea that who you are is a more thought thing than an actual being thing. And I think if you want to be within the world, then you have to leave your thought at some point. And that doesn't mean don't think at all. It just means use your mind as a tool, not a console. Not a defining principle, but something you use to help define things around you. I think when it comes to analyzing yourself and getting a better and deeper connection and understanding who you are, it's just about being present with yourself and learning to let yourself sort of be fluid in a sense. Like, I'm recognizing this with myself a lot recently. I've been meditating much more intently. I've been trying to get a better grasp on not who I am, but the way in which my mind has conditioned my body and conditioned my perspective to look at the world in a certain way. And in doing that, I'm recognizing that, who we are is very heavily influenced by thought, one, and how we feel, two. But I feel like the two is higher than the one instant. I feel like how we feel about ourselves is truly like the most defining thing that exists. And I think if we can just learn to be grateful for who we are and learn to posit some type of love within who we are, regardless of any type of external condition, we can learn to actually enjoy the life that we live, regardless of what we're doing, regardless of the application. I saw a quote that something like, it's ordinary to find beautiful and beautiful things, beauty in beautiful things, but it's beautiful to find beauty in ordinary things. I think that a lot of us favor this value chasing mentality when the value always comes from ourselves. And I think if we can just embrace that value within who we are in being ourselves, then we'll recognize that, all of the relationships that we build through that authenticity, that we build through being ourselves, that we allow through being ourselves, won't cause you stress. They won't cause you undoing. I feel like since I've been allowing myself to be, the only thing that I've truly been confronting is, in a way, my previous version of myself. And I think even so, it's not necessarily about looking at my previous version of myself and saying, "Ooh, I don't want to be you. I'm gonna cut you off." It's like understanding my embodiment, understanding who I am inside, void of this expression of who I am, and sort of allowing that to be, and using my thought, using my feelings to sort of be grateful for even parts of myself that aren't yet there. Like, oh, I'm grateful that I'm super patient in this regard. Or I'm grateful that I'm this. I'm grateful that I'm that. But not even embracing that gratitude in terms of just thinking, but feeling it. Like actually feeling grateful for who I am. You know, looking myself in the mirror and telling myself I love myself. Closing my eyes and telling myself I love myself. I feel like all of this sort of contributes to this idea that, you know, being is all we are. And I think taking away that being by constantly thinking about how it is in reference to other being takes away from our life. I think if we want to live a life, then we have to live it instead of think it. All that to say, I hope you guys are trying to take a step back from your thought, at least sometimes, or at least a step forward from your thought, and recognize that, you know, you can do anything you want. And you can be anyone you want, of course, with, you know, a relative tinge to it. But that's to say, like, if you think you're impatient, you think you're insecure, you think you're, you know, invalid. All of these feelings and associations with yourself have a direct opposite. You know, you can't have one without the other. The other has to be possible because of the presence of one. In the same way that someone can be super confident one year, something can happen, they can be super unconfident. And I feel like it's just a constant reference to recognizing that who you are is subject to change. And if you aren't present enough to watch your steps, you're likely to go in the wrong direction. So if you made it this far in the video, dang, it's kind of long. Thank you so much. I do appreciate each and every one of you. There's a lot to come in the new year. I'm planning on publishing a book in this new year. So stay tuned for that. I'd be really appreciative if you guys would check that out. You know, if you checked out my Instagram page, I post excerpts sometimes. But yeah, thank you. Keep being great. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, and love you.